Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to give folks just a few more minutes to get logged on, and then we will get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're just going to give folks a minute to get all logged on, and then we will get started.
All right, I think we're probably at about a quorum now, so I think we can go ahead and get going. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the second public meeting of the Denver Moves Bikes update. For those of you who are just joining us now, we had our first public meeting in November of 2023. So we're back here today to kind of show you all the work that we've been putting in over the past few months and the draft recommended map. So with that, I'll hand it over for our Spanish translation folks to give us an intro.
Hello, my name is Alejandro Arrieta. I will be the live Spanish interpreter. Thank you all for your patience as I provide these instructions in Spanish. Please remember that the intention behind this is for folks to be able to participate in the language of their heart, in the language of their preference. So thank you for taking a part in this. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Alejandro Arrieta, seré su intérprete del español el día de hoy. En este espacio queremos que usted pueda escuchar en el idioma de su preferencia, en el idioma de su corazón y por lo tanto verá un icono terráqueo en la parte inferior a mano derecha en su pantalla. Si no lo ve ahí, busque bajo el menú con los tres puntitos que dice más. Si tiene alguna pregunta, la podrá enviar en la sección de preguntas y respuestas en español también. Con eso, muchas gracias. Pueden ver un ejemplo de cómo se ve el icono terráqueo en su pantalla y ahora ya vamos a encender la interpretación para que puedan seleccionar su idioma. Gracias. Thank you very much. I'll now pass it over to our hosts to turn on the interpretation.
We're back. Cool. All right, so we want to kick us off with a little poll to warm us all up and get everybody kind of active here. So if you would like to go to menti.com or scan this QR code in the bottom left-hand corner and use the code 988-17616 to tell us what is your favorite way to get around. So we'll be using this tool to ask a few more questions later on, but we want to get everybody familiar with the Menti and get a little icebreaker here. Seeing a lot of votes for biking. And again, that code is at the top of the screen. It's 988-17616 if you haven't been able to log in. I'm seeing one for float on a boat. Maybe that'll be our next citywide transportation plan, is the float on a boat plan. Cool. Oh, yeah, refresh. 24 folks said bike. Lots of walking and biking. Few buses. So I think we're slowing down here. So yeah, thanks for filling that out and getting acquainted with the Menti poll. Like I said, we'll have another one of these later on in the presentation to ask some more fun questions. Cool. So with that, I will kind of kick us off here. Actually, I think Nora is going to kick us off with a little bit of kind of housekeeping and rules of engagement here for how our Q&A and chat is going to work.
Yep. So if you could put, as you listen carefully to the presentation and you have questions, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat, the Q&A. We will pull questions and answer them as best we can. There are quite a few of you on the call tonight, and if we don't get to every single question tonight, we assure you that we will put together an FAQ to get to all of the questions. The questions are not visible, unfortunately, to all the assembled folks on the call. That's the way Zoom works. We're sorry about that. About the fact that we can't all share in the list of questions, but again, we will do our very best to answer as many questions as we possibly can in the time that we have together.
Thanks, Nora. And just really quick, I wanted to introduce everybody. So Nora's going to be our moderator for the evenings. She's going to help us field some of the questions. Sydney is going to be co-presenting with me. She's on our consultant team at Fair & Peers, leading the project on the consultant side. And I'm Taylor. I'm a Dottie senior city planner. So with that, let's kind of kick it off. This is going to be a little bit different than some of our normal public meetings where we have PowerPoints and things like that. The goal tonight is really to acquaint everybody with the online tool and the website. So the online tool is really kind of a virtual open house in itself. So if folks miss this meeting, they're going to get all the same content and everything in the online tool itself. It's kind of a virtual open house. Yeah, so when we get to the landing page here, we have two options. You can click the English version or the Spanish version. The Spanish version will take you to a completely Spanish version of the website with Spanish maps and Spanish translation of all of the content. For today, we're going to click the English version because my Spanish isn't so good. Cool. So we'll kind of walk through what the project is, kind of our community engagement to date and what we heard. We'll go through how we design and plan bikeways. And then Sydney's going to give us some of the highlights of the new network. She's going to go over this new concept of a core network and then walk us through how you can give feedback on the actual map itself. So really quick, if you're just now joining us and learning about this project, welcome. Thank you. So this is Denver Moves Bikes. It is an update to our 2015 bike plan. So why are we updating the bike plan? This is kind of our periodic update. We try to update our bike plan and our pedestrian plan, our transit plan, all of these kind of modal or citywide plans about every 5 to 10 years. And that helps us stay on top of kind of the latest design trends and changes, be able to use new data and incorporate kind of all the changes and the stuff that's happened between 2015 and today, almost 10 years later. So this plan really takes into account and incorporates all of the recommendations that came out of the feedback we heard from you all back in November and December. A lot of the community planning and developments, neighborhood planning initiative projects and their area plans, corridor and area plans that Dottie has done over the years, and Denver Moves Everyone, and a whole host of other kind of recommendations have come together to form this update to the Denver Moves Bikes plan. So with that, why are we doing this? Why do we want to build a network of safe and slow streets with bikeways? So there's 4 kind of main goals that we have here with the plan and why we build streets with bikeways. The first is to really make sure that everyone in Denver has a safe and comfortable way to get around. So by building bikeways, we're achieving our Vision Zero goals of no fatalities or serious injuries on our streets. We're achieving all of our Denver Moves Everyone goals, safety, sustainability, quality, equity, all of those great things. And making sure that our streets are comfortable for folks no matter how they get around. More people on bikes, walking, taking transit also is great for greenhouse gas emissions, sustainability, and our air quality. I know we've seen a lot of smog and smoke over the past few weeks, and the goal here is to really decrease days like that and in the future. Another reason that we're doing this is we hope that folks have more choices. Riding a bike and taking transit and walking are really cheap ways to get around compared to driving a car. So by providing more options for safe ways to get around on a bike, we're expanding access to jobs, to education, recreation, and a ton of different kind of opportunities. And then finally, dedicated space for comfortable travel. So we know that there's a lot of conflict between our modes of travel on our streets. People riding their bikes on sidewalks isn't very comfortable. People riding their bikes in the same lane as a lot of high speed car traffic isn't comfortable and efficient for anyone either. So by providing that dedicated space for comfortable travel, we're reducing all of those conflicts between all of our modes of transport. So with that, I'm gonna give us a quick highlights of what we learned from our community engagement effort back in the winter time. So in November, December, we had a similar open house like this. We had a similar online map where we were really just gathering existing conditions data. We're asking people, what is it like to bike in Denver today? We didn't have any recommendations, any changes to the old map, just asking folks how they get around and what changes they'd like to see to the map. So during that phase of engagement, we heard from over 3,000 Denverites who gave us feedback in the form of about 2,500 survey responses. We got almost 5,000 individual comments on the map. And then we had an option where you could thumbs up or upvote or downvote other people's comments. So we got nearly 60,000 upvotes and downvotes, which is crazy and really exciting. So some of the key themes that we learned at a high level citywide is that greater density of bikeways is needed. So we need more streets with comfortable bikeways to get folks where they need to go. We heard that our highways, our rivers, sometimes our railroad tracks even are really major barriers that prevent folks from getting from A to B. We heard that our existing bike routes sometimes aren't direct, and the directness is really important to people. We heard from some community members that our white plastic bollards and our rubber curbs are not the most aesthetically pleasing, and that people would prefer more permanent materials like concrete, planters, things like that. And then we also heard that folks want more bike parking, more education, both from educating drivers and educating bicyclists about the rules of the road. So those are kind of the key high-level themes, non-location specific. So when we got into kind of the nitty-gritty of the map and the comments that we heard from you all last time, we asked a few key questions. So the first one was, Where would you like new bikeways where there isn't one now? Where do you want to ride your bike? Where do you want to go? And so this is kind of a heat map of some of the comments that we received from you all back in November, December. So we use this information to add more lines to the map and make sure that we're connecting to the places that you all told us that you want to go. Slide. We also asked folks about our existing bikeways. So are there places that really stink, that are really hard to get from A to B, or that feel uncomfortable that you don't like on our existing bike network? So this helped us identify kind of maybe some of the facility types or some of the locations that we need to look at for upgrading or making those facilities and those streets better in the future. We also asked folks about challenging intersections. So intersections are often the most dangerous and the most uncomfortable part of your journey on a bike, in a car, walking, no matter how you're traveling. So it's really important to pinpoint some of those really tricky intersections that can help make the whole rest of your commute or your travel more comfortable. So we use this information to kind of pinpoint some locations that could be future projects to intersections to make those crossings safer. Cool. This is kind of our next section. This is really educating folks about how we do our jobs, Bike Planning 101. How did we select all of the streets for bikeways? How did we pick the facility types? So this is kind of, we used a whole lot of data to select the bikeways. So we pulled projects from, like I said, previous plans, Denver Moves Everyone, area plans, corridor studies and things like that. We added kind of new bikeways that filled gaps in the network that connected important destinations. So where folks told us they want to go, like shopping, schools, recreation centers, job centers. And we're trying to make sure our goal here is that every household is within a quarter mile of a bike network. So that's kind of why there are a lot of lines on the map, is that we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to get where they want to go on a bike within a close range of their home. So that's kind of how the new streets are selected. And then the next step is to figure out, okay, we think this would be a great street for a bikeway. Now, how do we decide what type of bikeway? What does it look like? So there are different facility types. And those are listed at the bottom: neighborhood bikeways, shared streets, bike lanes and buffered bike lanes, protected bike lanes and trails. And I'll go through each of those and what that looks like and what those mean here in a second. But at a high level, the main two elements that we use, write this down, to determine which bikeway type is implemented on a street, are the vehicle volumes, so how many cars are on the road, and the vehicle speeds. And we use these two metrics because these are the best predictors for how comfortable a person on a bike would feel, either sharing a lane with cars or being right next to moving traffic. So our kind of lower speed, lower volume streets, so think your local street that your house is on, those are our neighborhood bikeways. If you go up kind of a little bit more in the vehicle speeds and volumes, we have buffered bike lanes, and then even higher is kind of our protected bike lanes on our really higher speed and volume streets. Okay, cool. So the first facility type, so we're going to go through each of these, and each of these you'll see has kind of a little icon at the bottom that shows you some of the potential impacts that you might see on these types of bikeways. And you'll see these same impacts reflected in the map as well. When you click on a street, you'll learn about kind of what types of improvements or impacts or trade-offs, considerations might have to happen to implement the project. So the first one's neighborhood bikeways. So like I said, these are low speed, low traffic streets where people driving, biking, scooting, walking can all share the street. So these include our traffic calming features, like the traffic circle we see in the photo here, sometimes speed humps or speed cushions, whatever you want to call them, to slow down vehicle traffic. Sometimes we include diverters, so that's something that reduces the amount of traffic on the street, that cut through traffic and only allows local access. So with neighborhood bikeways, we're also implementing tons of pedestrian improvements, improved crossings. We're looking at, if applicable, transit, stop, realignment, things of that nature. And yeah, really making the street a slow and comfortable space for everyone. The next one here is shared streets. So these are very similar to a neighborhood bikeway, but a little bit more in line with kind of what you all might have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So on these streets, cars are allowed to drive through, to park, but cars are kind of a guest on these streets. We're really emphasizing green infrastructure, placemaking. A lot of these are kind of in our envisioned to be in our kind of commercial centers where you have kind of that slow movement. Glenarm downtown or Larimer are kind of examples of these that we have now. So some of the things that you might see here are, again, improved crossings, slower vehicle speeds, lower vehicle volumes and reducing that cut through traffic. And some of these may require some travel lane or parking reconfiguration to an extent. The next facility type here is the bike lanes and buffered bike lanes. So in essence, these are just paint. The only difference between a bike lane and a buffered bike lane is whether or not we have space on the road. There's enough width on the roadway to add that striped buffer that you see in the top picture with our model Luna. And so these are kind of a pretty common facility types. They're what we primarily implemented pre-2015-ish. So you might see improved pedestrian crossings and bicyclist crossings. You could see some of those improvements that slow vehicle speeds. And one of the trade-offs of the impacts is we need space to add these to the street. So sometimes either a parking or a travel lane might need to be removed to be able to implement these projects. And then the next step up from that is a protected bike lane. So these are kind of Cadillac bikeways that people like a lot. So the picture on the left here is South Broadway that was recently implemented. So protected bike lanes can use either those rubber posts, those curbs, concrete barriers. Sometimes parked cars can be used as a barrier to separate people on bikes from people driving. Sometimes, like the picture on the right, the thing that is separating or protecting is actually vertical space. So putting that bike lane up at sidewalk level is also considered a protected bike lane because you're at a different grade than traffic. So some of the impacts here, we always, with all of our projects, will look at improving crossings and improving the pedestrian and access to transit realm. And then, like I said, for bike lanes, just because of the space needed, we sometimes have to look at reallocating parking or travel lanes in order to implement these. And then finally, the trails and shared use sidewalks. So you all are probably very familiar with these: Cherry Creek Trail, Platte River Trail. A lot of our Denver Parks and Recreation managed trails make up our trail network. And then shared use sidewalks are kind of the same deal. Usually those are more adjacent to the roadway where we'll have just a really wide sidewalk that folks biking and walking can share space. So with those, we of course will implement a lot of kind of improved roadway crossings with these types of projects. Cool. So a question that we get a lot from people is how are bikeways funded and built? What does this plan mean for building these bikeways? So a question I've gotten a lot recently is, what is this, are you going to go and build all of this tomorrow? What do these lines on the map mean? And the answer is no, we don't have enough money to just go build all the lines on the map tomorrow. This is kind of our 20-year vision for how we're going to use our existing and hopefully future funding sources to be able to expand our bike network in the future. So currently we have 3 main ways that we fund and build bikeways. The first is the Community Transportation Networks Program. So you might have kind of heard about this in Northwest, Central, and South Central Denver. We have our existing community transportation networks areas. So the idea with these is that we're building a complete network in a smaller geographic area so that we can entice more people to ride their bike and provide that complete network to get you from A to B within your neighborhood and kind of neighboring areas. This is kind of better than building those one-off bikeways to nowhere all over town that don't really connect to anything and aren't very helpful. So we've been working on those 3 community transportation network areas since about 2020, adding a new one that's kicking off very soon in the Globeville and Elyria Swansea neighborhoods. We're calling North Central Community Transportation Network, and we'll continue to build out the projects in all 4 of those networks and expand that program to eventually reach all of the city over time. The second mechanism through which we fund and install bikeways is the general obligation bond. So you might have heard of Elevate or RISE. These are projects that the general public voted on in 2017 and 2021. So a lot of these improvements were wrapped into some other projects like sidewalks, rec centers, libraries, things like that. But the bike projects were really kind of our, we call them the backbone projects, where we're linking critical connections that are maybe outside of our community transportation networks or tie into those community transportation network projects. And then finally, we have our Safer Streets paving program. So every year our paving crews come out and they repave our streets, and we are able to kind of latch on to that program and use this map actually to cross-reference where the paving crews are going and where we have planned bikeways in order to go ahead and build those bikeways. So those are usually quick and low-hanging fruit, kind of lower cost projects that we do opportunistically, but they save a lot of money over time. And then future potential funding sources. So we're always going after grants, bonds, fees, taxes, things like that to try to make sure that we can provide transportation solutions to folks and make sure people can get where they need to go. So this project and having these lines on the map will help us be a little bit more competitive when we're pursuing some of these federal and state grants, and move those projects from just an idea to construction much more quickly. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sydney to talk about kind of the new network and what we've been doing.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. As Taylor mentioned before, I am a consultant with Fair and Peers and have been supporting the city on this project. So I'm going to talk through some highlights of the changes that have been made to the network since that 2015 map. And then we will have a little quiz to get some input and also get everyone woken up and warmed up for a discussion that we'll have at the end after I do a demonstration of our online tool, which is another great way to give your feedback. All right, so highlights of the new network. The map on the right is showing any existing bikeways as solid lines, and then any bikeways that were new bikeways proposed previous to the start of this update of Denver Moves Bikes. This project is recommending adding over 230 miles of new bikeway ideas to the network could start looking towards funding, as Taylor mentioned, and hopefully be implemented in the next 20 years. We also heard a lot from the community about how crossings of major barriers like highways, rivers, railroad tracks are some of the biggest challenges to biking and scooting and getting around without a car in Denver. So pulling from a lot of great work done through other neighborhood community plans, as well as Denver Moves Everyone, the larger citywide strategic plan, we have identified and pulled into the bike network new bicycle and pedestrian crossings of major barriers. Additionally, we heard through our last round of community outreach that there are a lot of existing bikeways that folks would like to see more comfortable and have higher implemented types of bikeways. This is also, so we have identified bikeways for upgrades, guided a bit by that community input, but a lot by using data to understand which bikeways today are not meeting Dottie's standards in terms of the number of cars on the street, the speed of the vehicles, and the type of bikeway that's there now. So identifying bikeways for upgrades based on bringing them up to Dottie's new standards of safe and comfortable bikeways. Then a brand new concept to the Denver Bike Network that we are introducing with this plan is something called the Core Network. So this is identifying streets and trails to create a connected spine of high comfort bikeways across Denver. This core network, as I said, is a connected spine, a connected backbone that identifies direct connections across the city for longer distances of travel. It's intended that the core network would also be able to accommodate higher volumes of people biking and scooting. So where possible, having wider trails, wider protected bike lanes, things like that, in order to ensure that on this core network, it can handle higher volumes of people biking and scooting. The intention is also that the core network can help the city prioritize where more permanent materials are used and more advanced infrastructure like green infrastructure in constructing bikeways. So it'll help the city prioritize where those greater investments might be made first. Of course, there's other ways that things might get prioritized, but one way to help kind of bring a bit of a hierarchy to the bike network as it is constructed. So why develop a core network? This really came out of what we heard from the community about wanting a more direct, easy to navigate ways to bike and scoot and get around the city without a car. So other transportation networks in the city of Denver have similar hierarchies. One example would be streets, arterial roads like Colorado and Alameda. These large roadways help move a lot of cars through and across the city. Similarly, Denver's bus rapid transit routes that they've identified help prioritize high ridership, high frequency transit routes through the city for improvements. So with that, we wanted to develop a similar hierarchy for identifying bikeways that traverse the city that will be carrying larger numbers of people biking and scooting and that are prioritized for direct connections across the city and higher, more permanent materials. So how were these lines on this core network map identified? We identified in this draft direct bikeways that traverse the city with as few jogs and detours as possible. This network represents a spacing of about a mile apart with a bit more density near downtown and the core neighborhoods where residential and jobs and business density is greater. And then you'll see a little bit less density of this core network as you move away from that dense core of the city. And where possible, as I mentioned, identifying streets that would be able to accommodate larger numbers of people biking. So I encourage you all after this meeting to go onto this tool and explore all of this information on your own, but in particular, take a closer look at this core network. After you've done that, you can take a quick survey on what your priorities would be for a core network on Denver's bike network. And we will also be having a little bit of a polling question as part of this meeting as well for that. All right, and with that, I will hop over back to our Mentimeter poll. Flip to our next question. So what are the first, this is just a little bit of a quiz to see if folks have been paying attention. What are the first two things that determine which bikeway type is best for a street? The amount of cars on the street, the name of the street, speed of cars on the street, or the age of the asphalt. So again, to participate in this poll, you can go to menti.com and then use code 98817616. Give folks just one more minute. Or one, not a whole minute. All right. We'll show the correct answer. That's right. So it's the number of cars that are driving on a street and the speed of cars on that street, how fast the cars are driving. These are the two factors that most impact the comfort and safety of people walking and biking on a street, and therefore are the two kind of first driving factors in determining what type of bikeway is best on a street. All right. Our next question. What are some of the benefits of adding bikeways to streets? And I will delete that or remove that QR code. Safer streets for everyone, better air quality and reduced emissions, more choices for how to get around, dedicated space for comfortable travel. All right. Lots of responses across all of the answers. We'll give folks just a few more seconds to participate. All right, we'll show the correct answer. It's all of the above. So safer streets for everyone, better air quality, more choices for how to get around, and dedicated space for comfortable travel. All four of these are benefits to adding bikeways to streets beyond just improving the ability to bike around the city. All right. This question is similar to the question, or it is the question we have about the core network online, which I just showed. So we're going to ask you to rank which factors you think are most important in designing the core network. So this is really thinking about what your priorities would be for this core network. Is it place making and wayfinding, density of bikeways, directness, so reducing the number of jogs and detours that you need to get from point A to point B, aesthetics, using permanent materials, green infrastructure, or capacity, the number of people that can use a bikeway. All right, we've got some priorities starting to shape up. Looks like we have 6, 7 folks participate. We'll give people a little bit longer on this question to get to read through. Looks like directness and density are rising to the top. give folks a little bit more time. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all for participating in that exercise. As I mentioned, this question is also on the online tool. So we'll be collecting information on people's priorities for a core network that way as well. But just as a quick recap here, looks like first priority from this group is directness of those bikeways. Second is density, so more frequent spacing of the core network. And then capacity, so wider bikeways that move more people. Great, thank you all so much. Now I will be moving us back to, let's try to escape out of this presentation here. Great, moving us back to our online tool. So as I mentioned in a moment, we will be having a Q&A session with the questions that I know we've already been getting a lot in our Q&A box. So thank you all for populating that. But first, want to show another very important way to give feedback that we hope will be one of the bigger ways that we're getting feedback in addition to this meeting, in addition to we're actually, out in community at events with paper maps, talking to people in person about their priorities and their needs. And this is another great way to give your input on top of those resources. So I also want to point out, so I'll be giving a demo of this interactive map, but I want to point out that if you prefer to look at kind of a static version of it, we do have a PDF map linked here. So after the introduction of this feedback section, you can see where the PDF map is linked. You can open that up and view it. If you'd prefer to provide your feedback to us directly, you don't want to interact with an online map at all, we know that some folks, that's their preference. You can email us at denvermovesbikes@gmail.com or call 720-865-9378. You can email or call in either English or Spanish, and we will get back to you in the language of your choice. Okay, so those are all great ways to participate, but now I will jump in to our interactive map and give a bit of a demonstration of that. First, I'll point out this button in the top right. If you click this box with an arrow on it, it will expand the map, and either on your phone or on your computer browser, you can look at the map separate from the page itself if that's easier. I'll point out some of the ways to navigate this map to start. So similar to Google Maps, you can just click and drag around to move to different parts of the map. You can use your scroll wheel on your mouse or pinch if you're on your phone, or use the zoom buttons to zoom in and out of the map. So it functions very similar to Google Maps and similar apps like that. You can also find a location by searching it in the search bar on the top right. So I will search for a library in Denver, Ford Warren Library. You'll see it'll put a little point where that location is that I searched. And that way I can look at my house, my school, my work, a library, and see what types of bikeways are recommended around that location. One other thing I'll show there are 3 kind of categories of bikeways on this map. So future bikeways, these are bikeways where that street has no bikeway at all on it yet, and so these would be brand new There's existing bikeways with future upgrades. So these are existing bikeways where we have recommended that bikeway be upgraded to a higher comfort facility because currently it's not meeting Denver's standards. And then the solid lines are just existing bikeways that exist today and that currently do not have recommendations for upgrades in this draft. I'll also point out that these blue highlights behind some of the lines indicate projects that are in design or construction. So they are currently active projects, either in design or construction. So with that orientation, I will now show you how to use the tool. So as I mentioned, you can search, you can pan around. When you find a bikeway that you're interested in, you can click on it. And you will see this panel on the left populate with more information about the bikeway, the name of the street, the type of bikeway, what the potential impacts are to that street, and then whether that street is in design, in construction, or unfunded. You can also see previous comments that people have already left about that bikeway on the map. You can use the thumbs up and thumbs down to upvote if you really like the project, downvote if you disagree or are not as supportive of the project. And then to leave your own comment, you will click this comment button on the bottom of this left-hand panel. You'll choose the category, love it, don't love it, want another bikeway nearby, existing bikeway needs improvement, or other. And then once you've selected your category, you can type your comment in the box. Once you like the way your comment looks, you're ready to submit, hit submit. If you mess something up and just want to start over, you can just hit cancel and it'll clear your comment and you can keep going. So we're encouraging everyone to give really specific feedback this way because it's the best way for us to kind of collect information in a way that relates to the lines itself. But as I mentioned, we have an email and a phone number. You can leave a voicemail if you prefer to give your input another way. One last piece I want to point out on this map, you'll see when I clicked on a new bikeway, all that's showing on the map are the other new bikeways. If you want to show the other layers again, the other lines on the map again, you can click this little symbol in the top right that looks like 3 squares stacked on top of each other. There you will see all the layers, all the different categories of lines in the map, and be able to turn them on by clicking the eyeball or off by clicking the eyeball that appears when you hover over it. So just want to point out that feature because it's a little hidden in there. All right. And with that, I think I will pass it back to Nora and we can begin. We'll start with a reminder for folks that just joined of our rules of engagement and how this Q&A is going to work and kind of the functionality of it. And then we will start to answer questions.
Thanks, Sydney. We have a lot of questions coming in and we're doing our best to answer them in writing. So some of you may be getting written answers to your questions. We are also going to ask a few on the air. And if we don't get to your question, please rest assured that we will be putting together an FAQ at the end after our evening together is over so that anybody can go back and see the list of questions that we received. We will start with a question from Alejandra. At the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about finding ways so that everyone has a comfortable way to move around. And it's a phrase that the city uses often. How do you prioritize the ways that people move around in order for them to be most comfortable in their choices of mobility?
Yeah, that's a great question. I could take that one. So this plan is one of the ways that we prioritize modes and how we get around. So by designating a street as a future bikeway, that's kind of us staking the claim that bikes are a priority on this street. Our pedestrian plan covers kind of our pedestrian priority routes and where we think that maybe wider sidewalks are more important than bikeways, and our transit plan really has that same kind of hierarchy of high frequency transit, medium and low frequency transit. And those high frequency transit routes, sometimes, you know, that transit is the end all be all and the kind of most important mode on that street. So we have to kind of balance all of the needs and look at all of the planning documents and the priorities and the demands on each individual street. It's not just it's more of an art than a science, but yeah, that's kind of the gist.
Thanks, Taylor. The next question comes from Joel, and it concerns the core network, and it actually specifically concerns the survey tool. It's Joel is very excited about the concept of the core network, but it's not always easy to track it on the survey tool itself. Do you have recommendations about how to see it in its entirety? And he would love to see it called out in a more significant way on the survey.
Gotcha. Okay. I can respond to that. So in an attempt to make the kind of interactive map portion as focused as possible and as clean as possible with all the functionality that comes with trying to develop that, we don't have the core network identified on that interactive map because it was just a lot of information in one place. So we would love, you know, input on the core network through the survey that I pointed out on the kind of website right after we have that map of the core network. We encourage you to explore that. And I will also mention, I think the lines on the map drawn for the core network are a little bit more, I mean, all of this is a draft, but maybe a little bit more in draft as, you know, we mentioned we're getting input on kind of just the concept and the priorities of how those lines are determined. And the city is still kind of working through exactly what that concept is going to look like in its final form. So would love your input either, you know, if you have a bikeway that you'd really love to see on the core network, putting that in the interactive map. If you have other thoughts, kind of including that in the survey that comes right after the core network map. But yes, so that's kind of a quick explanation of why it's not all in one place. We tried out some different iterations and it was too much in one location, and really wanted to focus a lot of the more specific comments at this point on the recommended and upgraded bikeways, so not to overwhelm that tool.
Thanks, Sydney. On the subject of the core network, Rob asks, the Broadway lane is a great example of a bikeway working well on an arterial. Will we see more examples so that we can start to really internalize the concept of the core network, where the city continues to provide high quality bike facilities that build out a safe and complete core network?
So are there other examples of roadways? I'm sorry, one more time with the question.
I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for how successful Broadway is and how integral that idea would be to a core network.
Mm-hmm.
Does the city intend to continue providing that level of bikeway service?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of one of the key pillars of the core network itself, is that we're providing not only the direct routes that get you all the way across the city, east to west and north to south, but that the projects themselves, the vision for them, not saying this is definitely going to happen for every single project in the near future, but the vision for them is that they will be that higher quality, they'll be built in concrete, hopefully eventually including some green infrastructure, landscaping, things like that, that make the streets more enjoyable to ride on. And a lot of those streets, yeah, are like Broadway, or like Colorado's one that we highlighted even on the core network, because it is really the most direct and the only north-south route for about a mile or so in either direction. And it has all the destinations that people want to go to. So providing that high comfort, high quality, dedicated bike lane on some of these kind of current roads that are currently a little scary and uncomfortable and you wouldn't want to bike on. These are really transformational, visionary ideas and hopefully future projects that we can work on.
Thanks, Taylor. We're going to stay on the core network with Gary's question. Can diverters be part of the core network to reduce traffic speed and volume?
Definitely. So we tried to make up the core network of our three, what we call our high comfort facility types. So protected bike lanes are one of those, our trails are another, and then neighborhood bikeways are the one where we would definitely be putting diverters along the neighborhood bikeway corridors that are on the core network. The idea being that we're lowering those number of cars on the road and creating really a bicycling first and people first street on those neighborhood bikeways.
Staying on the core network, what is the intersection between the core network and the 5280 loop project?
Oh, good question. I think they are a little bit similar but different. So the 5280 trail I see as a little bit more of a recreational and a placemaking thing, where you're trying to get people to stay. You're trying to get people to interact with the 5280, with the businesses adjacent to it, with kind of the greening and the amenities and the things along the 5280. It's really just a loop around the kind of downtown core area. Whereas the core network idea is a little bit the opposite, actually. It's less about staying and more about directness and getting folks from A to B. But some of the similar things that we'll probably see in the core network and the 5280 loop are that, higher quality permanent materials, looking at making those spaces more inviting.
Thanks, Taylor. This question is from Ryan, and the question is, how do you prioritize what to build first among these recommendations?
Good question. So earlier in the presentation, I kind of went through our three main ways that we build bikeways. So the first one is that community transportation networks kind of program and idea. And within each of those community transportation network projects, we'll usually kick off a planning phase where we say, hey, community, here are all of the lines on the map in this area. Which ones are the most important to you? We only have this much money to build the projects, so we can't build them all. So help us decide which ones are the most important. So we kind of do that prioritization for the community transportation networks projects at an area level. And then bike paving projects, just kind of, we look at kind of some of these same factors of like directness. Are there other bikeways adjacent that serve that kind of purpose and that route or not? And are there a lot of bikeways in the area? Does this bike or the area need more bikeways? Things like that. And then the bond is another kind of interesting one where we are looking a little bit more broad stroke and citywide and asking folks to vote on projects that we've determined. And in order to kind of pick those projects, there's a lot of stuff that happens. But one of the key things is the Denver Moves Everyone project. So that's our strategic transportation plan for all of Dottie, all modes. So that project came up with a tool. It's kind of a geospatial kind of analysis tool. It's very nerdy that uses a ton of different factors like equity, the propensity for mode shift for a project, and a ton of different factors to spit out kind of a prioritization number. And we use that as as one of many tools to look at how to prioritize bikeways and other projects throughout Denver.
Thanks, Taylor. This question also has to do with implementation, and it's been asked in a number of different ways by Alejandra, John, David, Stan. There are a number of questions that how does the city handle conflict when it comes to implementation between a recommended bikeway and the way a street is being currently used, either by residents or businesses? Parking is one of the examples that I think comes up pretty frequently during the implementation phase of a bikeway installation.
Yeah, great question. So that's pretty tricky, and it's there's not a really easy answer for this. We do our best, of course, to implement the intended vision of the project and implement the highest comfort bike facility possible, while still balancing all of the needs of the businesses and the community, the residents, the folks that live and work on each individual street. And sometimes those projects have trade-offs. Often we do have to remove parking, and it's really hard. Both, you know, from a day-to-day perspective for the folks that live on the street, and from an implementation standpoint to push those projects through the finish line. But it's really kind of project by project dependent. We look at things like parking utilization and a lot of different kind of pieces of data to determine whether or not parking gets removed, or whether or not we need to identify another parallel bikeway that maybe would serve that same function, while still allowing that vehicle access if people, if that is truly needed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have an interesting question from Corita, who asked, has the city engaged with cyclists and people who use the bikeways that have recently been installed, and asked them how safe those treatments feel and if they're the right ones?
Yeah, so our first phase of engagement back in November, December 23, we asked just that. So we had a similar online map like this where we asked folks about their experiences biking in Denver, and are there streets that stink that we need to improve? Are there existing bikeways that we need to look at making better? And that's one of the inputs into this recommended bike map that we see today, is where we heard from folks that the existing bike network isn't really working, or bikeway isn't working for whatever reason. And that flags to us, so maybe we need to upgrade it to a different facility type, or look at spot improvement treatments and things like that to make it work a little better and feel more comfortable.
And Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was another separate project last summer too, right? Where the city went back and collected brand new data on fully completed bikeways to see, and went to the community and got their feedback on how those bikeways were working since implementation, and got some really great numbers on showing a lot of reduced speeds on streets with bikeways, reduced volumes in places where the city put in diverters for that purpose, and also just seeing an increase of people biking and scooting on those roadways where those were installed. So there has been a project to kind of study particularly very recent bikeways that were installed and how they're functioning, and community reaction to them.
Yeah, and I think that project, they hope to have some little short summary statistics and things posted on their website, hopefully pretty soon in the next few months. We'll hear more about that hopefully soon.
We have at least 2 questions regarding safe routes to school, and whether planning for safe routes to school, school streets have been incorporated into the planning for Denver Moves Bike Update.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the inputs. I think, Sydney, you're about to go for it.
Yeah, I can go ahead. Yes, so the locations of schools and access to schools was one of the factors that we looked at in kind of drawing new lines, adjusting the alignment, ensuring there are high comfort bikeways near schools. So definitely the location of schools and access to those schools on bikeways was a big part of the things that we looked at in creating this draft.
We have a number of questions about funding. How do we pay for these treatments? How do we pay for these upgrades? And how does one advocate for for support and funding for the installation of bikeways?
Yeah, great question. So bikeways get funded in a lot of different ways. So the bonds that we talked about earlier are one of the big ways that we fund construction and design of bikeways. So next time a bond comes around that has bike projects listed, please vote for it. That's a big help for our program and for our ability to build bikeways. And then other kind of ways that we fund are like capital improvement plan and just kind of like our general budget. So again, then that's just talk to your city councilors, advocate to the mayor, give Dottie funding to build bikeways. And then in addition to that, we have, state and federal and local grants and things like that we apply for. So even at the, at your federal and statewide level, advocating to your elected officials to continue to fund active transportation projects and to put those funding opportunities out for us to apply for really goes a long way.
We have a logistical question regarding the survey tool, which is, can people who are using the tool see one another's comments?
Yes, you can. And I will share my screen again and demo this because I think that's a really important point. So give me just a second to get that back up here. Okay. So back in the tool, when you click on a bikeway, right now I have Marion Street Neighborhood Bikeway selected. If you look on the left-hand panel here, on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see up top, that's the information about the bikeway itself, but everything on the bottom are comments from community members that have already left comments on the map. So if you click on that, you can see the category that they listed, and then their comment. And so once you have submitted your own comment, you will be able to see other people's comments. Just clicked on another one. Here's another comment on Welton Street. So I think that's a great way to navigate the map and just get oriented, is click on some streets that you might be interested in and see what other folks are saying. But yes, you can read their comments. They'll appear here under the information about that bikeway. And then you can add your comment and you will see it appear there as well. And I will stop sharing again.
Thank you, Sydney. We actually do have a question about bikes and including scooters. Signage right now indicates bike lanes are for bikes. Are there any plans to include scooters in that signage to make it absolutely clear that that's a pathway for scooters as well?
Yeah, so on some of our downtown streets in particular, where we see a lot of scooter traffic, we're currently kind of looking at if there are ways to add additional signage to make that abundantly clear that scooters should be using the bike facilities. And then we're trying to just educate folks any chance that we can get about the fact that just because it says bike and just because this plan says bike, Denver Moves bikes, doesn't mean that we're not talking about scooters and other personal mobility devices as well. So yes, definitely encourage people to scoot in the bike lanes, scoot in our neighborhood bikeways and trails, and not in general purpose traffic or on the sidewalks.
Speaking of signage, Calvin asked about shared use paths and clear markings for cyclists and people rolling versus walking. Can you address the fact that that is not currently part of the ways striping and signage is done on shared use paths?
Yeah, some of them actually are, some aren't. It kind of just depends on the street and maybe when it was designed and built. Some of our older installations of shared use sidewalks were built before we thought it was a good idea to stripe separate areas for bikeways versus pedestrians. So that's definitely, I think, in the future, something that we'll do more of is making sure that we designate that separate space for people biking and people walking. But sometimes there's just not enough room and the sidewalk has to be a little bit narrow, so striping that, line in the middle would make it so that it feels really narrow for either mode. So it just kind of depends on the street. But that's definitely something that we try to do when we can.
Thanks, Taylor. We have another core network question. How does the core network handle major barriers and intersections, things like I-25, and addressing the safety of crossing these really significant arterials and barriers?
Yeah, I can start and then Taylor can jump in if I miss anything. In our first draft of kind of identifying that core network, definitely identifying ways that those corridors on the core network cross those major barriers. So wherever possible, selecting the bikeway nearby that either has an existing crossing that would maybe just need upgrading, or identifying those recommended brand new bike and pedestrian crossings across our major barriers and integrating those into the core network. So definitely in the selection of the streets and trails on the core network, identifying a plan for how to cross those major barriers, whether that exists today or not, was a very important part of that decision making. And similar to a lot of other elements, the design, the intention would be that the design of those crossings would accommodate more volumes of people biking and scooting, and be made with more permanent materials where possible, and that a lot of existing crossings today that are not great were built before Dottie's current standards for building bikeways and adding bikeways to those types of crossings. So that's kind of a vision of how we see that fitting into the core network, and was a big part of how we selected where some of those lines are drawn.
Thanks, Sydney. Sorry. We do have a question about unprotected bike lanes and door zones. Will that be a continued approach that the city will take in installing?
Yeah, good question. So that's another kind of one of those older designs that we try to use as little as possible and only where absolutely necessary. That was kind of one of the things that was an okay design back in the 90s and early 2000s. But now we try with all of our new projects to avoid that condition if at all possible. Yeah.
Well, we've actually come to the end of our questions, many of which were answered by the absolutely crack team behind the scenes with ready at their fingertips answers to your questions. I will end on this note. David asks, I would like to be included in future surveys. How do people stay in touch with the project? This is a perfect opportunity for you to let people know how to continue to be engaged.
Yeah, so if you go to our website, which I think some of our lovely question answering assistants may have put in the chat or in the answer thing, you'll see that there's a spot where you can sign up for email updates. So if you can go to that website and type in your email, we'll continue to send out e-blasts periodically with updates about the project and ways to engage.
Well, I'll turn it back over to the panel for closing comments, but this has been a great evening together. The questions have been really thoughtful, and we hope you have enjoyed the opportunity to get some of your questions answered.
And I'll use my closing remarks before I pass it to Taylor to reiterate. We are going to be summarizing all the questions that have been and answers that have been put forth tonight in a questions document, which we will be posting on the city's website on the Denver Moves Bikes update page. So you can keep an eye out for that, so that you can go back and reference a lot of the good discussion, read through at your own pace, questions that were maybe answered by text, and get a lot of good information that way. And with that, I'll pass it to Taylor.
Yeah, I think we're gonna close it out, but thank you all so much for joining us. It's been great to interact and answer some of your questions tonight. Please help us spread the word about the online survey. The more folks that we hear from, the better job we can do with our final recommendations map. So yeah, spread the word to your friends and family and colleagues. And thank you all again for your time, and have a lovely evening.